So good morning, everyone. Just to tell you what you might suspect anyway, namely that we are still waiting for our keynote speaker, Despina Spanou. So she should arrive momentarily, but if she takes a little bit more time, then we have our distinguished panelists with us that will then improvise and start with the panel and do the keynote a little bit later. So please bear with us for another couple of minutes. Right, so I have the latest, namely that Deputy Director General Spanou is on her way and will be arriving shortly, but she suggests that we do get started. So warm welcome to the European Policy Center for today's event on cybersecurity as economic security. And we chose this title not only because we run a flagship project called the Brussels Economic Security Forum, and we see everything through the prism of economic security for that reason, but also because we genuinely believe we need to look at cybersecurity through an economic lens. And economics of cybersecurity, of course, has a long history. It goes back at least 20 years. But today, more than ever, we need to look at economic incentives and parameters to make sure that we do everything that needs to be done in the field of cybersecurity. So we know the threat landscape. Just to quote ENISA's last year's report, maturing threat environment with rapid exploitation of vulnerabilities and a growing complexity of tracking adversaries. I think that says all about where we are. In that context, the European Commission has recently put together a new cyber package that includes the revised Cybersecurity Act, but also some other amendments. And I'm sure Despina Spanou, in her deep dive, will tell us all about it. But as we are waiting for her, I would like to welcome on stage Hendrik Bourgeois, Senior Vice President of Mastercard. Yes, please. And Alberto Di Felice, Policy and Legal Counsel from Digital Europe. So Hendrik, if this mic works, I think this works. I would like to ask you about the supply chain situation, because at Mastercard you can see the landscape quite well, I would imagine, working with a good number of companies who are exposed, who are putting out cybersecurity measures, and we know that there is more at stake through the supply chains. So the human factor remains one of the main vulnerabilities, but third-party engagement is definitely rising. There are reports that it actually doubled 23 to 24, for example, and it accounts for about 30% of the cyber risk. It did account at that stage. So how can we proactively go about ensuring cybersecurity in the supply chains?
Well, thank you. Hello. Yes, it's working. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Paweł, for inviting me to this interesting discussion. I think it's a very timely discussion and a very important one. Let me start first by saying that it's not only important for a company that I represent, Mastercard. We invest massively in cybersecurity, given the fact that we manage a global payments network. And so for us, cybersecurity is of critical importance. It's of critical importance for the industry, the financial services industry, but for the European economy as well. And I think it's really, really telling that you're coupling cybersecurity with economic security, because I think last time we worked together, I was working in the semiconductor industry, where supply chain resilience was also key to economic security. And I think the same is true in cybersecurity. Let me give you two quick illustrations while we wait for Despina. We have time now. So in August of last year, Jaguar Land Rover, which is the UK's largest automobile manufacturer, suffered a massive cybersecurity attack. And as a result of that attack, not only did it had to halt its operations in its sites for about 8 weeks, I think, with costs of about 50 million, equivalent of 50 million euros on a weekly basis for the company itself. But about 5,000 companies associated with Jaguar Land Rover were affected by it as well. And the total cost to the UK economy of that cybersecurity attack amounted to approximately 2.5 billion euros. So that's one example. A month later, in Japan, the Asahi beer brewing company was also struck by a cybersecurity attack, where they had to stop the production in almost 30 of its sites in Japan, and where, of course, the cybersecurity attack, which meant closing down their IT systems and their network and having to take orders with pen and paper and faxes, but where it had also repercussions on Asahi suppliers and Asahi distributors, Asahi restaurants, bars, and consumers. And we have at Mastercard, we have an economic institute that basically does a lot of research, and we asked the institute to have a look at the historical transaction data to see how the market was actually impacted compared to the situation the year before. And so we saw, for instance, that using our historical transaction data analysis, that in the weeks after the news of the cyber attack became public, we saw a lot of stockpiling. Also a lot of users, a lot of consumers, a lot of distributors of Asahi beer started to stockpile it, which basically exacerbated the problem even more. So, long story to say, to illustrate the point that it's not only a systemic problem that affects consumer confidence, investor confidence, that it harms reputations and financial, with a great financial impact, but it's something that is endemic and systematic. And so from a supply chain perspective, I think it's of critical importance that stakeholders and market participants see this as a systemic risk and not only as a problem within our own firewalls, right? And so there's no market participant, no stakeholder that operates in isolation. We're all part of an industry, of a sector, of an ecosystem, and our strength depends on the strength of the weakest link. And so, unless we kind of take that view of global supply and complex supply chain in a problem which is transnational, right? It's important to realize that it's like climate change or international terrorism. We can't really tackle these issues without having a holistic and systemic approach to them. Unless we do that, we're never going to really have a substantive answer to this important societal challenge. And so the answer to me to deal with supply chain issues is really partnerships and fostering partnerships. And this is something that multinational companies need to do and are doing in our world. This is something that we're really trying to promote by working, for instance, with SMEs, who are by definition more exposed because they have less financial means to invest in cybersecurity tools and cybersecurity mechanism. At the same time, they're more vulnerable to cybersecurity attacks. And so it's critical for large multinational companies to work with their supply chains to make sure that they have affordable tools, automated tools, that they don't have to hire separate IT departments to deal with these types of issues. Because these attacks are now, AI enabled, automated on a large scale. And so, working with the whole of supply chains to deal with this challenge is of critical importance. And I also think, when Despina comes, we'll talk about it, I guess, that there's a very important role for the public sector to take care of this supply chain resilience from a cybersecurity perspective. And one thing that is very important, particularly for the smaller players in the market, is simplification. But I'll stop there.
No, perfect. Thank you so much. So if we could maybe spend a couple of minutes on how, in your view, the EU framework, as it evolves, responds to these needs. And I'm looking at Alberto, especially to tell us how he feels about it, because there has been a lot of emphasis on the transparency of supply chains in the Cyber Resilience Act, especially this latest proposal, and we will hear about it momentarily, puts in place a new ICT supply chain cybersecurity framework. It's sort of aimed at another hugely important strategic issue, namely what types of suppliers can we trust, and what countries can we trust in the long term, and what to do about it. But how do you look at the EU framework vis-a-vis the challenges that Hendrik just described?
Thanks a lot, Paweł. Good morning. Is this working? No? Yeah? No? Yeah? Okay. So most of cybersecurity discussions that I participate in, I usually start by reminding everybody that the first cybersecurity strategy from the EU came out in 2013. That's 13 years. Probably shows how old I'm getting. But in institutional terms, it's actually not that long a time. If you think, cybersecurity so long from a governmental perspective has been largely a matter for member states. It was very fragmented in Europe. In 2013, digitalization was well on its way, so we still had a good understanding, I think, of the challenges. And for the first time, a cybersecurity strategy at EU level came out. And since then, things have changed dramatically. Cybersecurity has been a huge part of the expansion of European legislation that we've seen, particularly in the past 5 years. We've seen the big reforms of the NIS directive. We've seen the CRA. We've seen probably more than 5 years, but the first Cybersecurity Act was also put in place. And this is one area where, strikingly perhaps, industry hasn't been really complaining that there's a regulation dealing with cybersecurity, because there is a good need for the right set of incentives for companies to do the right thing. Right, we see that in the ecosystem that there's huge variance in the understanding that cyber risk can bring to your company, to your ecosystem of suppliers, et cetera. So it's good to have that, let's call it level playing field, to use a fashionable term, so that the right incentives are in place across the value chain to do it. Now, the challenge, as with all regulation that we've seen lately in the digital space, is that there has been indeed an acceleration. So we've produced quite a lot in a very short amount of time. And therefore, we have produced quite a lot of overlaps, quite a lot of duplication. And this is the recognition of that, I think, has come really with at least the promise of having omnibus proposals that we've started to see now with this new commission, because there's obviously been a change of pace in understanding the challenges ahead of us. Obviously, today is the anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So the cybersecurity defense nexus is very, very well understood and very, very urgent. But this commission has also started with the calls from Letta and Draghi to do some, very decisive things, take some very decisive steps to simplify the single market, remove barriers there. And I started saying that, a lot of cybersecurity started national, and there's still quite a lot of pockets that are national. And also we need to, simplify our overall regulatory burden on companies. So the balance now is, how do we achieve the legitimate cybersecurity objectives that we have and still try to streamline the different instruments that we have? And we hear, a lot of pleas from across our membership in various sectors. One of the interesting things that Digital Europe has been going through in the past few years is also growth in membership and growth from across a number of sectors that are not traditional ICT. So we've had finance, a different set of manufacturing verticals, healthcare, defense that have come on board in the membership. And consistently, they have to deal with their own sectoral frameworks. And on top, they have to deal with these new horizontal frameworks that we've put in place, cybersecurity being one of them, but AI being another one. And there's, anything from supply chain obligations, transparency about your systems, processes, and services, and reporting that are across all these legislations. And we're only just now starting to look at how do we bring those, across in a way that allows companies to do it without suffering too much.
Great, thank you. A lot of the emphasis of the revised EU Cybersecurity Act is indeed on ensuring a robust framework, but also on lowering the burden on companies, right? So ensuring compliance is supposed to be as much facilitated as it can possibly be. My question to both of you is sort of regulatory compliance where this needs to stop, or should, in the framework of economic security, incentives go further, right? Because we know very well from what's going on in the real economy that cybersecurity investments are most often not treated as investments, right? They're treated as a cost item. They are such on the balance sheets of companies. So how do we turn the logic of the approach into one that would feature a much more prominent way of incentivizing companies to invest in cybersecurity? And it's really to both of you. Right?
So maybe I'll start, and I think it's an excellent question. One that is close to my heart because, yes, we need simplification, and, it's good that we have rules and regulations in place to, install a level of minimal protection. But we have a huge regulatory arsenal, already in place. And what we don't have, I think, is a real kind of two things, I guess. Number one, it's clearly, cyber resilience is clearly a foundational issue for, our society, which is increasingly digital, right? And so if you don't have cyber resilience, it's very hard to have a digital society that is robust and sustainable, first of all. And secondly, to your point, I think we should start looking and thinking about cybersecurity not so much as a technology or as an issue of compliance, but as an issue of trust and resilience, and one that also creates competitive advantages, particularly in a European context. When we think of us Europeans as, perhaps a more risk-averse society than other societies around the world, I think, cybersecurity should be, an area where we should invest and where we should, think about industrial policy to the same extent as we're dealing with industrial policy to deal with other types of factors that impact our economic security. There's no good reason why I think, we're not thinking about cybersecurity as an area where, public policymakers should be thinking about, beyond, regulating, creating the right economic framework, whether it's with state aids, whether it's with, allocating, scarce financial public resources in a future multi-annual financial framework to try to really do something about it. Because, there's no reason, I think, why Europe should not have the most secure digital environment on earth. And I think there's a lot of things that we could do to try to ensure that, cybersecurity becomes a European asset that distinguishes us, that differentiates us from other regions in the world, which then, generates investments, generates, new business models, fintech growth, innovation, and you name it.
Brilliant. Alberto, the same question.
Yeah, no, I think you'll always have those two aspects, and they're going to be each very important. When it comes to regulation, we're going to continue, I think, to strive to have the gold standard in Europe when it comes to regulating these sort of things. It's in our nature. I think the other part of the equation really has to do with the key challenges that we have to scale our capacities in Europe. That applies to cybersecurity, but it applies to our, let's say, industrial strategy more broadly. Our regulatory tools, we've been talking quite a lot that they, in and of themselves, sort of promise that they'll give us more competitiveness. And I think we're starting to see hi, Despina, welcome. We're starting to see sort of the limits of that in the sense that you have to think of regulation as something that solves, a failure problem. So in this case, for cybersecurity, we're solving the fact that the level is not high enough. So regulation can incentivize that, but it will not make Europe more competitive in the sense of, creating an industry around it. So there's other part of the equation I was talking about, the growth of the EU side of things and how Europe is creating scale around how we treat cybersecurity. I think there's a lot of reflection in this commission around doing more together, doing more in terms of, spending bigger in terms of spending both our public funds, in terms of looking more at pan-European procurement. And that can be a lever to create a different type of public-private partnership where we are clear on our priorities as a continent, let's say, and we can sort of, start to look at legislation for what it is. I think for too long, we've sort of told ourselves a lie that regulation in and of itself would do a lot of things. It will do a limited amount of things, which are very important, but not everything else.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alberto and Hendrik, and very warm welcome to Despina Spanou. What we have done so far is we plunged straight into the supply chain issue, but more from the economic perspective rather than the geostrategic one that we reserved for you when you come. We also talked about the nature of incentives in the new cybersecurity package, regulatory versus more economic incentives in the future. So that's how far we have gotten to. Warm welcome. Despina Spanou is, of course, one of the main architects of the EU cybersecurity approach over the years, including in the latest package. And she will now take us through what was proposed in a deep dive fashion. You can, by the way, speak at the lectern if you prefer, or speak here.
I want to be respectful
entirely
to
up
the
to you.
order of things.
Yeah.
So first of all, my sincere apologies for my late arrival. You can imagine something did come up this morning that needed to be tended to, and I had to take care of it. My sincere apologies, but I'm here, and I think I came in right at the very interesting point that you were discussing. Let me address first what you were just saying about regulation versus industrial policy, basically. I think that we need to start looking at regulation more as an opportunity rather than as a regulation in the old sense of the word. For me, it is extremely interesting. Let me share something with you that I still meet young people. Just last weekend, I met somebody who's outside our bubble. He was telling me, but the EU, what are you doing? All you do is put regulations for our water bottles and the cups. Well, at least Europe gets to people somehow. But I was like, this is a joke. You cannot be an educated young person and not realize what the EU has done during the pandemic, how we got vaccines for every single European citizen, during the war that broke out, that we are now collectively trying to see how we will deal with it because it's right in our frontiers. So regulation is also about that. The regulation in cybersecurity will contribute to peace, will contribute to democracy, will contribute to having a level playing field, and possibly to an industrial cybersecurity strategy. You were discussing the supply chain chapter of our Cybersecurity Act. I think you're all a very knowledgeable audience here, so I will go straight to the point. What has sparked a lot of interest is that we have finally gone for this approach of how do we de-risk our ICT supply chain. So how do we identify places where we have dependencies from possibly high-risk suppliers, that also from a geopolitical point of view. Because yes, this is a regulation about harmonizing the internal market. Yes, that's the legal basis. But we have also issued recently communication about economic security, where we said, well, we'll need to look through a regulation also at our economic interests. So if you have markets in which you have 90% of a market dependent on one single supplier from one place in the world, of course, if you want to be strategic, you want to see how you're going to do it. But of course, because the dependency is not it's so high, you cannot do that the day after. So we have gone for an approach, and I'll be happy to explain that also in my expose on the Cybersecurity Act, that is going to allow not only to have a step-by-step de-risking, but also to accompany it possibly with a cybersecurity industrial strategy. And I think that is the next stage. So our regulation should lead us to that. It needs to be seen now not just about having 27 member states playing with the same rules in the game, because that's why we have regulation in the EU. We are 27 sovereign countries. We're not one federated system. And we need to put on the table on these important matters, how do we do it? How can we make sure that because one has a weak cyber system, he does not become the entry point for the one who has a strong one? Because we are interconnected. So we start with risk assessments, we look at the supply chain, and we look at areas where we have seen that there are issues. We did that with 5G mobile networks, and we have created a toolbox 5 years ago, and we said, okay, let's go and de-risk. Half of the member states almost have done it. The other half still need some time. So we proposed in our Cybersecurity Act, let's go for it now within a single transition period, because there we also have alternatives in the market. But the rest of the Cybersecurity Act takes a very incremental approach. First, you do a risk assessment. Then you identify what are the key assets where you may have dependencies that become vulnerabilities because of high-risk suppliers. And then you identify whether this is an issue that comes from cybersecurity concern. And this is the geopolitics of it. You create a list of those countries. There won't be many, right? So in today's world, and then you list the entities. These entities can also come and say, you know what, I want to be exempted. Don't impose restrictions on me because I can prove to you that I'm not a high-risk supplier. And then it's fine. You also have this possibility in the exception. So it's again a very open trade approach in our regulation. But all this is done in such a way with the participation of the member states that will allow us to also see whether we have markets we need to develop. Because if you identify in a risk assessment that you have a huge dependence in a market, that's when you need to create incentives and create motives and give in the market a push. This is what we did with chips. This is what we're going to do soon with the Cloud and AI Act that will come in the spring. So this regulation opens up an opportunity for an industrial approach as well in the supply chain for ICT.
Excellent, thank you so much. And I would already have lots of questions about the practicalities of that journey, which you described for us with risk assessments and then countries versus entities. And the list of countries, as you said, emerging at some point in time. I don't know if would you like to say more about the package right now, or shall we open up for questions? To have an interaction. I totally agree. I totally agree. So I will reserve my question on the ICT cybersecurity supply chain framework for and then invite everyone to ask questions immediately. So I already have two. Of course, Hendrik and Alberto, you are more than welcome to do that as well. So please, if you could all introduce yourselves when you speak. So the microphone is coming.
Hi. Yeah. It's Sam Clark from Politico. Can you just say anything about the reaction that you've got so far from member states to the ICT supply chain elements of the CSA? Thank you.
That's a very good question. So, obviously, this is a very I'm trying to find the right word. I don't want to say groundbreaking, but this is an important development in our cybersecurity regulatory ecosystem, and it needs time. But I will tell you one thing: we were impressed with the interest of the member states. It is not a situation by which you have an immediate reaction that's saying, "How could you do that?" And I have spent enough years in cybersecurity regulation, or not, in the ecosystem, to tell you that for me this is an important evolution, because when we proposed over 10 years ago the first NIS directive, it took us a very long time to convince member states that there was a need at EU level for such legislation. The first ever cybersecurity law in the world, it was NIS. And now we are in a very different stage where member states are interested in how we're going to go about this. So I cannot measure it as positive or negative, Sam, but I will say that there is a great interest, and we will need to discuss the specifics. And when the parliament comes in, I think that will become even more interesting, because we see that there is a desire to see cybersecurity also from the geopolitical point of view.
I think you have, definitely. What I would maybe want to explore a little bit further is, what types of categories of member states can we speak about, right? Namely, as you said, the situation is not uniform. Some are well protected, others less so. Some are more exposed, others less so. But what I'm interested in is when this procedure that you put in place is already there, and if it starts to be applied, if you do the risk assessments, identify the countries and so on, and then you arrive at a situation in which, some countries have a greater degree of penetration than others, right? So what do we do? Namely, how do we go about scaling this down when necessary, and what type of intensity of discussions can one expect at that stage? So that would be my reflection upon your answer. But Hendrik had a question as well, so let's maybe add to it.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your insightful comments, Despina. I wanted to ask you questions about how the private sector can and should contribute to a successful implementation, not only of the regulatory package, but ultimately also of industrial policy, or seeing it as a competitive advantage. And the point I wanted to make is the following one. I work for a company that is a global company. We operate in 200 countries. We, last year I think we processed over 180 billion transactions globally. So we have a very global landscape view. And as we were talking, cybersecurity is clearly a transnational issue. It doesn't stop at the borders. And so my sense is that it's really important. The paradox is, the world continues to increase connectivity. We digitally and otherwise, and supply chains continue to be global, while geopolitically speaking, we see more fragmentation, right? So that's the paradox. And so I think my perception is that it's really important to work with companies that have this global view, that have this global landscape, that can contribute to addressing risk and offering solutions, and to kind of fill a gap that exists as a result of perhaps the geopolitical fragmentation that we're seeing. And so, I was wondering whether you had any views on whether the new package or in the future or in general, how do you see this public-private partnership to, address the risk, but also to, address the opportunity?
Thank you, Hendrik. I think that we are entering a new phase of how we do things, and we need to work more together because we are faced with real challenges. Now, it's not just about raising our standards to deal with the typical cyber incidents. Today, we're dealing with cybersecurity as part of addressing warfare situation. Our critical operators, our critical entities will be hit as part of geopolitical warfare. It's not just by the guys who are trying to make money or who are trying to sabotage. So I think that this is a great opportunity for public-private partnerships, and I think that this is where private companies have a huge opportunity to be at the forefront of cybersecurity. You don't need to wait until things are done from a legal point of view. I have this discussion often on NIS. You know that on NIS we have a bit of a disappointment in that not all member states have transposed. But does this mean that if I'm an operator, I have to wait until it is transposed in every country? If I apply it in my company, it's my corporate strategy. I apply it across the EU. I'm not going to wait for the legislative system to operate because they're going to do it anyway, because it's an obligation. So this is where companies can prove that they are in compliance and that this is the way they do business, compliant business, by applying first the rules before waiting also for the whole legal system to complete the processes, because these are processes. When it comes to this particular, the ICT supply chain, I'm always surprised that when we issue risk assessments, I don't see reaction from the business world. And I sometimes wonder if I was somebody in the board of a business and I saw that the European Commission issued a risk assessment which is prepared by 27 countries. It's not just a guy sitting in an office writing stuff, right? Takes months, we carry out assessments, and we go out in the market. I would react immediately by saying, oh, that's interesting, you make this and that recommendation. I can do that already. So I think we need to move to that stage, and maybe we need to change the way we do our business as the European Commission and create some alliances and some ways of dealing with you directly, with the private partners, so that we have solutions. Just 10 days ago, we published 3 risk assessments. One on the ICT supply chain, so kind of high-level principles of how people should buy, basically, systems for their supply chain. One on connected and automated vehicles, and one on detection equipment. That's Sam's favorite, actually, I think. But why do only journalists show interest? I would have expected that companies would come forward and say, that's interesting. Are you going to make something more specific for us to have like an encouragement to go to that direction? Or here is a European business that could help, or an American business, or whatever. Doesn't matter where in the world it is from, so long as it is addressing the risks that we have identified. So I think this is where we need a bit more work, to be more specific and not general anymore, and not to wait until things are done. Whether the proposal stays as we made it in the Cybersecurity Act or not, it will have a chapter on the supply chain. There's no way that it will not, because there's a desire for that. So let's start working on how it can be implemented and which are the areas where there are key assets that maybe the Commission should look at and create incentives for more market development.
Great. I haven't forgotten about the question, and you will come right next. But I want to return, in a way, this point about reactions to risk assessment and the interaction with the business community to Alberto and Hendrik. because when Despina says that there isn't enough of a resonance on the part of the business community, why do you think this may well be? Are the channels maybe not sort of sufficiently clear, or are the issues too complex and too sensitive for the business community to speak with one voice, and so on and so forth? Why would you think that is?
I think it's largely one very clear, good example of when ambition hits, reality, in the sense that we're very well aware of that as a trade association, how we engage with our national trade associations and the broader membership that we have. We have 56,000 companies, big and small, from across our membership. And again, they're mostly national companies, and the way that EU News reaches them is still lacking, let's say. So there's still a challenge that we face as the EU bubble, if you will. And I think that applies to private sector in the bubble, but also the institutions, and understanding how the member states and businesses in the member states actually react to what's coming out of the EU. I think we're still not there. And this is where it would be the citizen in the street, but also the companies in the member states that we hear from. They still hear largely about the bottle caps and the sort of regulation that comes out. It's much more difficult for them to get to the positives because, again, the EU lacks a lot of the usual things that a national government has in terms of interacting with its business, in terms of being a big buyer that can actually tell companies, you will do this because I'm asking you, and otherwise I'm not buying this stuff. So this is still lacking, and it is, part of this growth. I think, right, we've built the cybersecurity regulatory environment, starting literally from scratch, and we've done a lot on the regulatory front, as I said. And I think it's quite natural to think that the regulatory front can be a stepping stone, if not more, in terms of creating that awareness. I still doubt that, it can actually do a lot. We need other tools and work on other things, more proactive things to do it.
Yeah, I think you're right, Despina. I think we need to be proactive. I cannot speak for an industry at large. I can only speak for the company that I'm working for. And we're very much aware of this, and we're very much ambitious. We have a lot of ambition to work with the public sector, so much that we created last year a European Cyber Resilience Center in our headquarters in Waterloo, where, basically consisting of cross-functional experts that we bring together from all over our operations globally, and we work together with the public sector, with representative of Europol, Interpol, the European Central Bank, NATO, the European Commission. We do simulations, threat simulation. We do penetration testing. We exchange best practices so that we, on our hand, are aware of the pressure points of what the public sector stakeholders are thinking about, but where we also can bring on concrete solutions to common problems. So I think we need to be very practical about this and just pick up the challenge and start just doing it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So the gentleman here was first, and then we have two more questions at least. So yes, please, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, this is work. Yeah, thank you. Ryan Gaffigan from DGA Group, Public Affairs Consultancy. So thank you to the panel so far for the introductions and interventions. A question for Despina, if I may. Could you perhaps elaborate a bit on the intersection between the ICT key assets in the ICT supply chain and their interaction with NIS2 critical and sensitive functions? Because there's kind of different layers that this is operating at, and it's just interesting to hear how these layers are interacting. Thank you.
Did everyone hear the question, by the way? Yeah, because the mic could be a little bit louder. We could do a couple of more, as long as if we are fine tracking the questions, then yes, we can definitely take more. So please.
Yes, thanks so much. Julia Wodzinska, RPPA. Despina, could you give us some more insight into the Commission's philosophy behind how to phase out high-risk suppliers, which I think there was a little bit more elaboration, for example, in the 5G toolbox that you mentioned. So any insights that you can give us into the approach would be great.
Okay, great question. And then, do you have a question? Yes, please. Yeah.
My name's Seda. As we all know, that cybersecurity is not just about the economical, it's about of the defense in the whole countries. And do intellectual property and the licensing rules in the emerging security technologies limit their spread to other countries, thereby increasing competition and the security while potentially undermining global security?
Yeah, can you maybe turn it into a question? Or was it more of a comment?
Do intellectual property and the licensing rules in the emerging security technologies limit their spread to other countries, thereby increasing competition and the secrecy while potentially undermining global security?
Okay. Thank you for that. So that's an intellectual property question, and then we have a question in the back. Yeah.
Thank you. Cinzia Guido from Shein, online marketplace and retailer. Just a question on certification. So it's our understanding that there is not a certification that is preferred, let's say, to ensure compliance. So for now, market practice is to use also ISO 27001. But will member state have, let's say, more discretion on choosing the certification, or how you suggest to move on this? Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks so much. So let's take these, and we'll hopefully have some time for the last rounds. So
I start. So the scope of the Cybersecurity Act is NIS2. Okay, so this is clear. So we're talking about operators that fall under the scope of NIS2. We have not gone beyond that because that would be a little bit more complicated. The way that the process is a little bit orthodox indeed, because it mixes with risks, assets, and geopolitical considerations, of course, but geopolitical considerations that are linked to security. So the first step, and I think that may answer also some of the next questions, except the intellectual property, I'm sorry, I didn't understand. So the first thing we have to do is the risk assessments. And the risk assessments aim at one and only one purpose, which is to identify if there are serious dependencies that can lead to strategic risks, basically, and that become vulnerabilities. And these are carried out with the member states and the European Commission, as I mentioned. Once we have identified, we have made those risk assessments, and we have identified the risks, then we look at the identification of the third countries. And there we're looking at the legal rules. I'm sure you have seen the proposal. Here we're talking about, and I can enumerate, I want to be quite precise on this. We designate third countries as countries posing cybersecurity concerns based on the following criteria: existence of laws in the third country which require entities under their jurisdiction to report information on software or hardware vulnerabilities to authorities of that country prior to these vulnerabilities being known to have been exploited. Existing practices in the third country demonstrated by independent sources that require entities under the jurisdiction of that third country to report information on software or hardware vulnerabilities to authorities prior, again, to those vulnerabilities being known to have been exploited. Absence of effective judicial remedies, and here is where we introduce the European rule of law, and independent and democratic control mechanisms that can correct the identified security concerns, including about existing practices, as mentioned before, and substantiated information about one or more incidents of threat actors controlled from that country. So when we have identified that incidents come from specific countries and operating out of the territory of that country, carrying out malicious cyber activities or campaigns. So these are very, very specific reasons why you would identify a country as a country posing a cybersecurity concern. And we do not name any country already in the proposal, and I think that has to be very clear, because this will require a lot of work. And then once we have done that, Then we look at the key ICT assets where the risks may go. You cannot outright ban or impose measures on the whole chain. You need to look at the assets, and this is something that the security risk assessments that we will carry out will have to be concentrated on. And then we have a set of mitigating measures that can come. It's not outright prohibition necessarily. This is also a bit of a misunderstanding from our proposal. People think that it's about banning. No, it can be all sorts of other restricted measures that will be determined by the Commission and, of course, adopted with the Member States. So then once we have identified those high-risk suppliers and the assets, those high-risk suppliers will not be able to participate in a number of strategic activities like standardization activities, certification, conformity assessment bodies, the cybersecurity skills attestation that we have introduced with the Cybersecurity Act, very, very important, public procurement and funding programs, of course. So there's a set of strategic approaches that would apply when it comes to restrictive measures. And again, as I mentioned, you can have an exemption from those restrictions if you want to prove that you're not a high-risk supplier, basically. That you do not apply the rules of that third country, for instance, even if being asked. So this is to cover, I think, your question. You have to remind me what was the latest question. I think I just addressed it. Now, on certification, very important part of the proposal, we now propose to have certification on cyber posture. So certification for compliance. And this is something that has come from the business world that has asked us for such a possibility. I think it is high time we use certification practically and concretely, so you can have certification schemes that prove compliance with NIS2.
Thank you so much. Any comments, Alberto, Hendrik? If yes, please grab the mic, and if not, we go for the very last round. Yeah, please, Alberto.
I was going to say, I think on the supply chain discussions, it's obviously a framework that's very broad. I think there's a lot of options for the Commission to look at specific things or to look at everything coming from a country. So I think what's going to be interesting in the negotiations is, I think we desperately need a European framework. This is where I think we, as Digital Europe, have been very clear. I think there will be discussions with member states, of course, about how the functioning of that system works exactly. And I think we shouldn't, again, institutional design is important, but we shouldn't forget that behind any decision that will come out, there will be an actual supply chain and commercial interests that are at play. So I'm under no illusion that the sort of discussions that we've had so far, be it on telecoms, be it on cloud, will not still be on the table. Ultimately, we need to look at what's in our best commercial interest, understanding all the geopolitics, et cetera. So I'm expecting this process to still be fairly complicated, though it's happening at European level going forward. When it comes to certification, that's a very important part. Probably we're not talking about it as much. There's the promise there of using certification schemes better than we have been doing. I think the Commission recognizes this, that the schemes haven't functioned as intended. Here again, though, it's relatively open-ended. So, for example, there is promise that if some European legislation allows cybersecurity schemes to prove compliance, then that can happen. We probably would have wanted a more seamless process, for example, for CRA, which is a big discussion that we've had with both the Commission and NISA. And what's the relationship with these infamous harmonized standards, and can certification schemes be of help? I think we can still work on it to make it a bit more seamless and make sure that we don't end up with more of a backlog, actually, of schemes, right? Because we still have the problem of churning out those schemes, and right now we have deadlines. We have more of a promise of a faster process, but again, a deadline doesn't do it in and of itself. You need the goodwill and the clear sight as to what you want from a scheme for it to happen fast.
so much. Hendrik, anything to add? Or let me have a look if there are any last questions or comments. Yes, there are. In fact, there are quite a few. So let's collect them as well. And this will be our final round. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks to all the speakers for all the insights and the interesting conversation. My name is Laura Wiesenfeld. I'm with Siemens Energy. Despina, you mentioned that the CSA has obviously the big cybersecurity component, but it's also about industrial policy. And I had a question regarding the general industrial policy of the Commission. So we know we are expecting soon also the Industry Accelerator Act, which we understand will also have some cybersecurity components. So I wanted to know to what extent it links also to the CSA. Will the CSA be the baseline that ties all this together? And also thinking about procurement, that is also an important topic within that. So yeah, just a general overview of all that.
Thank you so much. So then there was a question next to you and behind you. So.
Thank you. Hi, Despina. Hi, everyone. Zoe with Mastercard. A quick question, follow up on the industry participation point. So with the CSA, previously we had the SCCG for certification, and now there is the assembly that is being proposed. So I was wondering if you can share a bit more your vision in terms of what you hope the assembly to offer in the overall discussions. How structurally, how have you envisioned industry participation in what we see now in the CSA, and why also the SCCG was not continued? Thank you.
Thank you so much. When we go one row behind. Yep.
Good morning, everyone. Marta Grosso from the European Energy ISAC. Just a question regarding high-risk vendors, and specifically concern coming from the community. So if the proposal proceeds as it's currently drafted and includes progressive phase-out obligations for high-risk vendor components already in service, and if smart grids devices such as smart meters are classified as performing critical functions, the market could face serious technical and operational challenges across the board, especially given the fact that already third countries' vendors have quite a large market share in this domain. So my question would be mainly regarding this challenge and this concern. Do you have any perspectives to share with us? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think I saw a question at the end. Yes. And then here, and this will be the last two. Oh, no more? The last three.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for the insightful input. So, Lynn from CCCU, I have two questions. First of all, a lot of European business associations publicly mentioned that the mandatory exclusion of the high-risk vendors could be costly and disproportionate. So, how the Commission will address the concerns from the business community. Secondly, does the Commission also expect some retaliatory measures from the third countries? Let's say, for instance, given that how China reacted so fiercely about CSA2, what about the prospect of the European companies probably could be excluded from the third country market? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then your question will be the one before the last. Or if you travel this way, then maybe the gentleman could speak first. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Alexander Laktionov. I represent APC company, which are working in renewables energies. That's why my question about security, cybersecurity in energy sector. So if you speak in general about supply chain, everything looks well and clever. But in fact, only now, so far as I know, a lot of articles in newspaper about some threats if we use equipment of one of the biggest producer of equipment in the world, because it's cheaper, 2 times cheaper as minimum. And if we can, in our project, we can try to use alternative equipment, we have to pay for this. And so far as I know, in energy sector of Europe now it's a huge challenge because European Union can't produce equipment for renewables energy. But renewables energy key direction for develop our green transition. So what are the measures to increase cybersecurity resilience in energy sector of European Union in Cybersecurity Act? Maybe you can give some points.
Okay, thank you so much. So that's a question about both the cost of economic security, cybersecurity, right? But also how do we build our own capacities in certain areas? So yeah, this will be the last question then.
Hello, I'm sorry for asking two questions. It's very specific. You're talking about the criteria for deciding which are countries of concern. And if I understand correctly, not all of those criteria need to be fulfilled. I think it can be just one. They're not cumulative. How fundamentally would it change the legislation from your perspective if it was cumulative, if they were all required? Is that something that the Commission is kind of for or against or worried about? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So certain types of questions clearly dominate the interest and the discussion, but it's good to have them answered right away after the proposal came out.
Industrial strategy regulation, but I said it can lead to that because, of course, when you end up having a clear mapping of the areas where your risk assessments have shown issues, that's when you will need to develop in parallel and on the side industrial strategy to address them. And I think that goes to answer some of the questions also that were asked. And I mentioned it at the beginning of my interventions. Obviously, we know how difficult this is because some markets depend highly on high-risk vendors. And there is the issue of the cost. They depend highly because, of course, yes, they are, first of all, available, and secondly, they're very interesting, economically speaking. So this is what we will need to look at. Because at the end of the day, because you know, and this goes to answer the industrial question or your question on the costs. But what is a cost? Our president said something that is, I think, completely common sense. When it comes to our technological development in Europe, we need to make strategic decisions on our independence and how we're going to make sure that we technology is now inextricably linked to security. So it's not just about one supplier being cheaper than the others. Because if being cheaper means you're a high-risk supplier, meaning that you create a dependency, meaning that also you can have a certain control over a whole market, what is the cost of that? Here we're looking at the bigger picture with this proposal, and it is time that we do so. And it is not about how much one part of the supply chain will cost. It is about how you will make sure you de-risk it. That it does not become a vulnerability for the European market. You're very right, we have an issue, and I think this is also your question, when it comes to energy, electricity supply, because there are high dependencies. And we have identified electricity supply systems and electricity storage as one of the priority areas to carry out risk assessments. In fact, there is one risk assessment being carried out already in this area that will be completed, exactly because we need to identify what risks are we going to talk about and then to have a strategy as to how we go about it. We have to be very clear. It was never the intention of the design of this proposal, and you said I was one of the architects. So I was one of the architects. I can tell you, it was never the purpose of this design to cripple the markets and to create issues. And from one day to the next, you don't know what supplier to get. This will require a step-by-step approach. It is time that we do it, and it will take years, right? But we have to start. None of this will be automatic. On 5G, we have gone a bit further with a 3 years transition, 36 months. Because there we have half of the member states that have already done the work. We have the risk assessments. We have alternatives to the high-risk suppliers. So it's a completely different ball game. But when it comes to the other markets we have identified, we still have a way to go. And it will take time. And you will need in parallel to create the alternative. So it will take time, but we had to start. This is the message of the Cybersecurity Act. Europe is starting to look at these issues and how we're going to deal with them. But there should be no worry in the markets that we're going to do things so fast that from one day to the next we will not know how to or the supply chain, because it is also our obligation to do that. So that's also for the energy sector. Now, on I'm looking at the yes, on your question on certification. Frankly, we did away with processes that were not adding some value. So, yes, we replaced what was called the group by an assembly to allow stakeholders to give us their views and also to understand where we may need to focus our certification work. But what is important is that for each certification scheme, there will always be the stakeholder group consultation. That doesn't go away. And that's the most interesting bit for the market. That for a particular scheme in a particular area, that's where you need to have the stakeholders in. So we have not done away actually with the group. It's just the formality, if you like. The consultation of the stakeholders remains key to our certification proposal. Sam, on your question, I think that all the criteria are so serious that one suffices. I don't think you need to, we have not gone for light criteria. They're all very serious. So in my view, one suffices. If you look at the world today, parts of the world that would satisfy one may probably satisfy the others as well. But I don't know. We will see if the co-legislator opts for cumulative assessment of the criteria. This is something that is open. And I would like to close with that, if you allow me. I think that there is a desire out there for the supply chain chapter. So that's why I said I think there will always be a chapter as part of the Cybersecurity Act. But this is only a proposal and is now up to discussion. And I think there will be a lot of discussion. And there will be a lot of views that will come to the Parliament, to the Member States. And I don't expect this proposal to stay as it is. It will be shaped by the knowledge also that will be accumulated by the legislation. But I think that for its key philosophy, everybody agrees. And that's a good start.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Despina, for your open and eloquent answers, which come now basically right after the publication of the package. Now, I would like to outsource my concluding remarks to Hendrik and Alberto, because we've focused a lot on some of the more sensitive parts of the package. But economic security is about more than that, right? It's also about small and medium-sized companies who are under pressure and who are also under cyber attack. A lot of the times, the cost of a cyber breach keeps on rising. IBM has good numbers on that. 10% up every year, $5 million on average globally. So if you looked into the crystal ball for 2026, what would be your one wish that we don't forget about as we discuss the new package, as the negotiations grind on? What should be the one issue that we need to keep in front of our minds?
I would say very, very briefly. This is a problem that requires a European solution. clearly, in reality, a global solution. But we can only do what we can, and so I'm very glad, and I think the Commission should be supported and commended for the initiative, because this is an area where we as Europeans will be stronger in enabling to address these challenges together than individually, obviously, first of all. And secondly, I would simply reiterate what I said in the beginning before Despina joined. I mean, ultimately, I think we need to move towards this idea of industrial policy. And I think there's a real opportunity for Europe in terms of competitiveness, in terms of economic growth, where Europe can distinguish itself from other global players as, developing and having the most secure digital environment on earth.
Thank you so much, Alberto.
First was a very broad question. It's like what we need to focus on overall or cyber.
So it's an invitation for you to pick and choose what you feel most strongly about.
I think you were talking about the backbone of the European economy, smaller, et cetera. I think the one thing that we as a trade association see a clear win in the next year is simplification. That applies to cyber as well. I said it at the beginning. It's great. We're supportive of more cyber regulations needed, but because there's been so much of it, from reporting to other aspects, we can do more to help companies be a bit more relaxed in how they do it. And then the focus really needs to be on, fixing the main problems that we have that companies are suffering from, which is competitiveness in the single market. And there's a lot of levers. I'm going to repeat myself. Regulation is one of them, but regulation is going to take years, Despina said it herself, before we get to it. I have a feeling that we're sort of having the same discussion as with tariffs, if you will. We're using tariffs and regulation to achieve, a culture shock in the market, so the market is forced to do it. But we know reshoring is very, very costly. Calculations on the tariffs in the U.S. mean that reshoring automotive supply in the U.S. is going to take 5-7 years at least. We cannot expect that longer time frame. Companies are going to be very anxious because they need to see the benefit to them before they see the benefit for Europe. I think that's the name of the game.
Great, excellent. I want to add at the end, from the EPC's perspective, we continue to look at cybersecurity through this prism of economic security. So it will remain one of our central areas in the Brussels Economic Security Forum, our flagship project that is year-long, but also has an annual conference on the 4th and the 5th of June, in case anyone is interested. Having said that, I would like to thank very much Despina, Alberto, and Hendrik for this deep dive into the cyber package, and to everyone for a very lively discussion today. Thanks so much for coming.